summer we're starting the EdTech Journeys on Tour, or the EduTravel podcast. First up is Pori. Let's roll. Harri Ketamo, it's a great pleasure to invite you to the podcast and welcome you to the show. I've been following you for many years, and we haven't really been able to speak and get to know each other properly, although we've been moving around the same circles for many years. CEO and founder of Headai. Please introduce yourself, a little bit, your story, personal story, your studies before getting into, let's say, entrepreneurship, and then ethic entrepreneurship, and then AI research, and then to your PhD studies around the area. You're so prolific, but let's try to concentrate on the topics related to education and your solutions around that.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. My background is a bit, let's say, non-usual. I started with theoretical physics, my studies, but I find it that I graduated as a crafts teacher. So crafts, in most countries we don't have a discipline called craft, but it's folk crafts, metalwork, woodwork, industrial design, combination of many craft related skills. But at the same time, of course, most of my studies were natural sciences, but it was an interesting combination. Then I was few years working in educational sector, namely teaching mathematics, crafts, natural sciences, sports and so on. But then in fact during the studies I get interested on cognitive psychology and especially inductive learning theories, where we build our understanding based on, no matter if we read or observe or whatever, but we make observations, conceptualize them and learn via accommodation and assimilation of our thinking structure. So I did my Licentiate degree, which was in the last millennium in Finland between master and doctor, so you have to do 1 degree extra. But I did that one from inductive learning and learning theories. Then I get interested back on more physics related stuff, and I finally did my PhD on computer science related to complex adaptive systems in learning, but it was pretty much the same, but under different discipline.
Did you have a practitioner's perspective, like a teacher's perspective, or always a research-oriented perspective?
I would say that I had a real-world perspective, because there are a couple of challenges what I observed immediately during the studies, and especially when doing the licentiate and doctoral degree, is that quite often in research we do sort of a setup where we have a theory. Then we try to either support the hypothesis or reject it. And that ends up to either we prove something right or wrong, but we don't develop the practice in teaching. Mm. And I would say that the practice of teaching is if we take a couple of steps further, it is that we shouldn't try to turn something for technology that we can do better as people. We should do with technology something we can't do.
That's so valuable.
Yeah.
Especially now.
Yeah, especially now, and then already in early 2000, we too much try to do clever setups where we try to prove some ideology true or false. But the scaling the education was not the issue. But that was pretty much what I started to do with, at that time it was called neural networks and adaptive learning, but nowadays it's called AI. So AI, by the way, let's make it clear. AI is in its maybe 10th hype curve. Every 7 years we have AI hype. Now it's so obvious that everybody is talking. 7 years ago we had AI hype where everybody says that AI is taking your job. Are you ready?
So you mean 7 years, every 7 years, and then this is the 10th?
I haven't counted, but if we start to count back, it is not now. This is around ChatGPT.
Yeah.
7 years ago, it was AI is taking your job.
Yeah, because I didn't pay attention to your company really that much, focusing on AI back in 2013-14 when I started my edtech journey in Finland, because I was really into, let's say, softer skills. And no one talked about AI really, so I was like looking at, okay, even my talking points when I started speaking about Finnish education and digital pedagogy was around the far-fetched future of education to immediate impact. Everyone talking about the future of education, and I was like, okay, if we change mindset and think pedagogically and apply the technology we have around us, we can achieve amazing things. We don't have to think about what technology we will have in 5 years. So I was very much about, okay, YouTube had started booming, App Store, social media. So kids are learning so many things outside of school, but inside of school, they become these passivated beings and they don't really learn anymore.
Yeah, and there was big controversy between being at school or learning from Khan Academy. 2012-13 was a rise of Khan Academy, rise of MOOCs, rise of, let's say, distribution, scale distribution. And it wasn't the hype time for AI, it was 15, 16, 17, the previous hype. So in fact, AI was low. But if we go couple of years back...
You were still very advanced on your startup with Headai.
In 13, the Headai has founded 2015, but this is based on my really old research track started in, like mentioned, early millennium. But I have had several research tracks, several companies, so altogether this is my 5th company. And 13, we were doing educational games where kids were the teachers. And that was also motivated by scaling. Because in earlier years, let's say around 2010, more kids could have access to mobile internet and to adequate school. And now with adequate school, I mean the teachers who are more or less know what they are teaching about, or at least they appear into the classroom. Or you have some sort of measures on your progress. So I don't mean that more kids have access to school, but with adequate school curriculum, measures, interventions if you don't reach the goals. And we could do that with the games. And distribution via mobile network, Android, iPhone environments, and great access for everyone.
Yes.
But then 2013-14, the market changed, and there were that many, let's say, freemium models, and the educational gaming turned to not that science-based, and that's why the board started new things.
Can you tell us about that more in depth? Like, how did you see the landscape when it came to, because I talk about, we'll try to talk now about EdTech 2.0, or rather the pedagogical technology, but not still, let's say, teacher-oriented, but really student-centered methodologies, which when people talk about EdTech in general, there's so much technology that has nothing to do with learning, if we split education and learning. There's no research behind the technologies that are introduced, and usually the cheapest solutions end up in the classroom, if at all. And then you have these big companies also creating all kinds of technologies for education, but there's no, let's say, brain research behind what the technology actually does with the kids. So you said that you saw that there was this change happening, and I would like to hear your perspective on, let's say, the pedagogical, let's say the research part, since now I see that there's a strong need for people to talk more about the research side, the pedagogical side, with actual, let's say, knowledge about these technologies. And so you can talk about EdTech in general, but then also focusing maybe on AI and how we have seen that development the last, let's say, 10 years now, since 2013 to
and starting from the science-based or non-science-based, I think there are really good training that is not science-based, but there is a need. And then there is also really bad science-based. But when we turn something based on purely, we believe that gaming teach you something, and then there are super stupid games where you can, well, you have to do a lot of stuff, then you can learn maybe something, and then you once again do more stuff around the learning context. But it's also a saying that educational games are bad education and bad gaming. So you don't have to take this black and white.
Yeah.
But then what comes to learning, I think we should have and in learning there are a lot of things, but if we're talking about goal-oriented, we should have the goal. So in a way that if we claim that you learn to read with something, the goal is learn to read. It's not the goal is not to play the stupid game and maybe learn something. So goal is learn to read. And that's why the goal is really important, and we have to either make sure somehow we reach the goals, go towards the goals, or measure during the game. But I don't think that it's not that so scientific or not magic at all. We too often make it magic by building these frameworks that this is so clever that this trick makes the learning happen, and then nobody even gets the trick. So I like the hands-on measuring and the impact. I mean true impact, not just impact because of beliefs or ideology.
And I usually add positive impact because there's so much negative impact nowadays.
Quite good. And now we have turned more to the goal. If we set the goal, as a company, our aim is to future-proof people, future-proof curriculums, future-proof HR activities. And the big thing is that skills in certain area are evolving that fast. Let's take an AI. 1 year ago, almost no one discussed about language models, definitely not large language models. But in this spring, even in job ads related to machine learning, there is requirements that knowledge in large language models, blah, blah, blah. And that's why we have turned our thinking in a way that we can apply AI to, first of all, understand the skills demand in different scenarios. And the different scenarios, I mean that it's very different to look what job ads are seeking right now, or in what we are investing, because they're telling different story. Job ads, what are the entry-level positions in the business and industries right now? Investments where somebody believes and are ready to put money in order to bring something out in 2 to 5 years. And then, of course, to research 5 to 10 years, but a lot of uncertainty, a lot of black swans, a lot of unexpected events. And those are maybe the major scenarios what we can think. Of course, economical news, technological news. Curriculums tell the story, but curriculums are interesting because at the same time, for example, in vocational training, we should make sure that graduating students do have all the skills relevant for labor market. But it's very different for third-year student to first-year student. And that's why the curriculum for first-year students is not labor market right now, but we have to try to make it labor market in 3 years. And that's the tricky part where we can use big data, namely terabytes of data, algorithms crunching and building the scenarios, and then comparing that what is curriculum right now, what is the demand right now, where is the gap? But at the same time, what is the curriculum right now, what are investments, where are the gap? And trying to balance between those. And with that we can use large language models like we do in order to find those topics, themes, knowledges, skills, tools that might affect to the demand. And then we do have a goal. You should learn these skills. And it's formal education, so non-formal is always completely different. Or thinking skills is completely different. You can't that much measure thinking skills with skills. So it's very different dimension, and how to make it sure so your audience don't think that this guy is only talking about corporate training. No.
Can you elaborate more on that? Because you have a very interesting role, because you have this dual role as both a researcher and an entrepreneur. And I think the gap between research, what will be relevant in the marketplace in 3 years versus the present demand, to close that gap, I think is very important, so that you don't have, let's say, as in my case, 17 years of education and then nothing of that is basically relevant in the marketplace. So you have to start learning everything actually being in the marketplace. So when you don't have a vocational approach, when you have a very academic approach as an economist, which was my background. And so in general, how do you work around that? How do you close that gap? And then would you recommend or even say that it's mandatory to have your own research department in your, let's say, startup, in your let's say edtech company, if we focus on the edtech space? And then you maybe can elaborate a little bit on your own research story, because you have published, let's say, more than 100 articles. And if you summarize a little bit your own research career in parallel with your startup career, because that is what I think is very much missing and very much needed. And you see best case practices. What have you learned? What would you recommend basically to other players in the industry?
Yeah, this thinking that you have learned something you don't need is one thing we also have to make visible, because no matter if it is vocational skills or academic skills, you have to know and maybe master the basics. What more you know the old stuff, that easier for you is deeply understand the new stuff. And that's something. So for
can I add about that, let's say in scientific terms, because I know that this synapses start, let's say, working more actively, and let's say when you know 3 languages, it's easier to learn a 4th.
It is. It's in every level of learning. So not only biological, but we know the theory about sonoproximal development. It's closer to social sciences than the hardcore psychology. But anyway, proximal development is the area where you have to go beyond your current skills. You can take it via discussion with others or by applying tools, but you have to take the step. And that's the learning, and that's also very relevant when you are building new skills. If you have to take skills randomly here and there is no connection of your previous understanding, nor connection between the skills you are studying, they are pretty much irrelevant. But when you are building on top of your existing understanding, if you're in economics, know the micro and macro theory, it's way more easier to apply neural networks in order to build predictive, maybe something in between, or data mining paradigm type of economics. So it's easier, and you can connect, and that this is somewhere in between, and the background is valuable. For everyone who has done their masters, I would claim that everyone has done statistical methods, at least one course, most likely minor. It's 100% relevant in the age of AI, because AI is just really multivariable statistics. Everything can be turned back to statistics. Only the believers, and I say this bit negative way, only the believers of AI thinks that it's something superior, magical, or even divine, and far away from statistics. But it's statistics, and everything in AI can be transferred back to transistor logic, so if type of actions. There are just trillions of ifs, or the variable number can be millions, but it's just complex statistics, complex ifs, and that's why all the skills, no matter statistics or programming, they're relevant with AI, and that also making that visible is good for people, because when you know that you have something on this, you are not completely out of date. You have backgrounds. It's easier to take the next step and have those couple of courses to upgrade your skills to today.
And so your recommendation would be to really try to stay up to date on a personal level on these topics, also maybe do your research, learn something, or do you see possibilities to partner with specialists, let's say between startups and researchers? And I'm thinking about edtech startups in specific that might not have science-based products yet, but they would like to have more, let's say, research and practical research behind their products. And then also your own story there, if you want to summarize a little bit how you have been working with the connection of the two.
Yeah, I think it is somehow difficult to trust that somebody brings you the knowledge. One of the biggest things is that you have to be interested, you maybe have to be curious about new stuff. But then another end, you can't master everything today, so you have to decide what you are going to be studying. And that's why the own motivation, internal motivation about learning something is important. And when you are always scouting that what interesting is out there, it's not that much what you have to finally try to learn. But if you try to take all the courses from Coursera and edX and then you get frustrated that hey, they were also in the Harvard, there were good courses, you don't have enough time to do that even though you have 48 hours a day. So in that sense, you also have to be able to cope with uncertainty, incomplete information. Those are challenging skills that especially for 20, 30 academic people would need, very different. And then coming back to cooperation between startups and academia, that requires improvements. But I think quite often we think that research side they do a project and then somebody has to turn that to business. Sometimes that's good. But I think we should more think about the impact, what we are aiming, what is the problem we are solving. And then the cooperation might be easier because then we can turn it that this is a theoretical, this is algorithmic thing, this is a business problem. If we take, for example, European data strategy, it is something to bring a balance. Because now in the United States, the data platform business is purely monopolizing the data, selling the data. You become a product because you give the data for big players to sell further. Mm. And in the East, in the China side, the data business is for control. Collecting data in order to either rank you or control you. And the data strategy in Europe in the deepest is the third power, where people, companies can decide about their data, how we are sharing, what is fair data business, how the fair data business is done, but nobody knows it yet. So that's why we need research in that area, we need business development in that area, cooperation, but the goal is that in Europe we should have fair data business area, and then let's see what happens.
And what do you think will happen now with this present, let's say, hype of AI? Will it really take a sustainable, let's say, effect on society and not just be a hype, but really a big shift in development of technology and also in humanity as a consequence? And how would you recommend people to think about this, thinking about social media already being a big problem for teenagers instead of this big opportunity that social media elements could have for learning? So we saw like 8 years ago, maybe when I started here in Finland with these topics, we saw a fantastic opportunity of using social media elements for learning in new learning products. But maybe a little bit like with the gaming industry and the gamification industry for education, when you try to build educational games, they will never be as educational as the actual games. And then I have a very good contact in Sweden who said this very well, and I will write an article about this because this was a fantastic topic. She said, so now I'm not interested in education, I'm only interested in games, and then we have some learning on the side. And for me it's like, okay, the learning on the side now I think is more important to take into consideration for educators, because children can learn so much, which is now considered only the learning on the side. And that applies to everything. And then, so you shouldn't have them with, let's say, educational games when they don't compete in any sense of the word with.
That's also what I said in the very beginning. That quite often educational games are bad education and
yes. So I would like to quote you on that, and I'll have that as your quote. So how do you see that when it comes to AI and social media, the development now, these next coming years?
That's highly interesting. If I start from the hype today, it will become reality. I think this hype affects to working life more than the previous ones, even though we have to understand that all the previous ones has affected our working life. For example, even though everybody laughs about 80s AI winter, but if we think where it comes from bird detection systems or all kind of control systems in modern banking, from 70s and 80s. So they are reality. What happens in the banks in 90s? People were fired because the automation, because the AI, it's there. what happened with MOOCs? MOOCs are here. Everybody is now talking about scalable education. Yes. Nobody's not talking about MOOCs because it is normal. Scaling the education is 100% normal, and that's why MOOCs are here, even though somebody says that MOOC died. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
And same is going to happen with AI. In few years, ChatGPT usage is completely normal. We are not talking that the world changed that much. Because the amount of work is pretty much the same always. No matter if we are thinking about 1850s first industrial revolution or now, there are a lot of work to be done. Then there are always unemployed people, but the shares are pretty much the same. So AI will change the job. Maybe somebody will lose the job, and there will be new jobs. Yes. And in 2030 we have next hype, which is about connecting systems with AI. So now we have signal solutions, signal AI solutions that are super good, but they are signal solutions. Yeah. If we take part, for example, you can compare how close this sentence is to another sentence, and then you can get a number like, not correlation, but a 0.72. So what? They are pretty close. But why they are close? What we have to do in order to get the sentences closer? Or what if they are written in different contexts, but they mean the same? So those are the big questions which will be in the next hype. So now it will be normal in 2 years. A lot of changes will happen. So this hype is bigger than the previous ones. But in 2 years, nobody is worried about ChatGPT taking somebody's job, and then there will be a next.
And maybe also because the technology in general has developed so much, so this time the industry is more ready to actually implement it on a large scale.
Yeah.
So what would be your final words of, let's say, encouragement to educators in this case, and maybe parents as well, who are worried about AI taking over? So encouragement, or maybe some warnings, things to consider. You can choose which side you want to take on this, the positive, let's say optimistic side, or something that people should really embrace or be careful about.
Yeah, I think educators shouldn't worry at all. There will be always need for good teachers. And for those teachers who like to turn their back to the classroom and mumble themselves on the blackboard, do we really need them? we shouldn't need them in 80s, not 90s, not early 2000. So if you really want to be a good teacher, there is always job for you. The job might change, the organizations might even change, where you work might change, but good teacher is always needed.
Fantastic, Harri. I know our time is up for today, and I would love to have a follow-up session with you and go, let's say, more in depth with some of these topics. Finally, where can people find you and read more about you, your work, your research, etc.?
Yeah, you can go to headai.com and find more what we do. We have a premium platform also. You can find it from the landing page, so feel free to go and try it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Harri. And
thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Great to talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.